when we first started wanting to combine our finances, so we first started with just a joint credit card, and that was right when Brett moved in to my place. And we needed a way to decide or agree, I guess, on what categories would go onto the card and how much we were going to spend on them so that, there weren't any surprises and we were just kind of all on the same page. And obviously, those initial conversations about kind of revealing what categories you want to spend on and how much you want to spend on those categories can be kind of a scary and intimidating
a little
conversation.
Vulnerable. It's like
vulnerable. Yeah, a little bit like, oh, I don't know, like show me yours and I'll show you mine kind of a thing. So as we started to have those conversations, we came up with a concept of strip budgeting. So I can't believe that this is a concept that we made up. I think we had to have seen it somewhere on the internet, but we, anyways, for us, we invented the way that we do it.
What does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit in that? We tackle those questions and others in the School of Financial Freedom podcast. We talk about the role of money in our personal growth and spiritual liberation, the concrete math of budgeting and saving and investing, and how all this relates to the life you were meant to lead. Each episode is an interview with a former student of my online course, Financial Freedom 1, where they explain their favorite lesson and years later, what financial, behavioral, and spiritual impact it had on them. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of School of Financial Freedom, and your host. Glad you're here.
Hi, I'm Brett Lyon.
And I'm Andrea Kelly.
And you're listening to the School of Financial Freedom podcast.
In today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to get real with numbers, monthly budgeting with needs, wants, and bullshit. And I'm excited for you to meet Brett and Andrea because they are friends of mine and they took Financial Freedom 1 separately. And we'll hear a little story about that. But budgeting is sort of like the nitty-gritty, most baseline thing in personal finance. And most people fail at budgeting. And usually it's because, 1, their budgeting is too complicated, or 2, it doesn't reflect their values. 3, it's unrealistic. And 4, it feels like a chore. And so we're going to talk about all 4 of those ways that budgeting fails and how Brett and Andrea have sort of compensated and found ways to work around those things. Excited for you to meet Brett and Andrea. Welcome.
Thank you.
Brett, Andrea, when did you take Financial Freedom? Introduce yourselves too.
First, though, I do have to say my wife's name is Andrea, like the San Andreas Fault.
Oh, I messed up.
Eve of mine, and no worries, Douglas. Like, it's a very common. She doesn't care, I do. So I feel like it's gonna bug me the whole time.
No, I know it, but I just messed up.
Yeah. So anyway, I took Financial Freedom in the spring of 2019. So it was a little bit before the pandemic. And it was at a period where I had come back from a year of travel where actually Douglas and I had spent a good amount of time getting to know each other in Vietnam. And I was starting to learn or starting to figure out that I had a high-paying job and needed some structure and things around how I spend and what I do with my money. So, I took it and then met Andrea while I was taking the class, actually, I'm pretty sure. So I think it was a pretty foundational time for me because starting a new job, meeting a new partner, and kind of framing a lot of things in my life.
And she thought, wow, this guy looks like a financially responsible man. I'm going to have to swoop him up.
Ooh, yeah. Nothing more attractive, No, I didn't. I don't think I knew that you were actually taking Financial Freedom when we met. I thought that you had taken it before, but good to know.
And when did you take it?
I took Financial Freedom in April 2020. So pretty formative time in the world. And also for myself. So I had just been laid off actually from a startup I was working at, and obviously pandemic was kind of in full swing, and Brett and I had met in May of
2019. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 2019. Yeah. So, anyways, we had actually just moved in together. Sort of, we'd been wanting to and having conversations about that for a while, but the kind of pandemic shelter in place stuff really made us take the plunge. So, it was a very interesting time to be delving into my finances because it felt like there was a lot going on and also not at all. Like I no longer had a steady income, which is crazy. But I also, obviously, a lot of kind of the bullshit spending that I was doing, like going out and, entertainment and things like that were all wiped out overnight. So it felt like a really interesting snapshot in time and a time to be able to really analyze my finances from kind of like a bird's eye view, sort of not participating in capitalism at the moment, at the time that I was taking it. So it was pretty like interesting in that way.
Neither working nor spending.
Exactly. Which I don't know. Yeah, we were not afforded that luxury, I think, in life a lot. So it was very unique, I think, in that way.
Cool. Well, we're going to talk about budgeting today, and let's dive into the lesson to start with, and we'll talk about how you two have, because what's super interesting is you're not only budgeting for yourselves, but you're budgeting for each other as a unit, especially now as you have a kid. So that's all going to be super interesting. But let's talk about the lesson. Can the two of you explain what's in the lesson?
Sure. So one of the things that I really remember about the lesson is the idea that you pay yourself first. So instead of creating a budget based on how you spend all of your money, you first set up your savings goal. You set up the automatic payments so that you save that money out front. And that's kind of like in addition to taxes almost. It's like then all of the rest of it comes after that. So you say you want to save 20% of your income, you put that in, and then you make the budget with the rest of your spending after that.
Yeah, I think a thing that I really resonated with, I guess it's not about the lesson itself, but about kind of the lead up and the time that this lesson occurs in kind of the financial freedom curriculum is that, I think you say it at the top of the lesson that this is really where the rubber hits the road, but it's also important to have had the conversations about what matters to you and what your values are, because you really see that reflected when you start to put numbers on paper. And I think that if you've done the pre-work, if you've done all the previous lessons, then actually creating your budget should be the easy part. Like it shouldn't be the hard part. And I find that when it's hard, when you're like, I don't know, and I feel conflicted about these numbers on the page, it's likely because you maybe haven't done, or like there's something else that's blocking you. Maybe your feelings about money or your shame around some category of spending or your whatever other thing you're, maybe not having explored how that category aligns with your values or things like that kind of make it hard, not the budgeting itself. So when you get into budgeting, it should feel like kind of straightforward. And I think that's counterintuitive to the way a lot of people think about budgeting, because it's like budgeting is the financial work, but it's actually not. The work happens outside of budgeting, and the budgeting should just be a reflection of you and the way that you want to live your life.
It's super interesting that you say that, Andrea, because, I think back in my 20s and probably your 20s too, right? I had a much lower income, and like that was enough for me at the time, right? And what happens for most people, and both of you are high income earners, is that as our budgets or as our incomes increase, so does our spending, right? Like people just spend up to their incomes. In fact, 81% of Americans have no idea how much they spend. They're just spending literally how much they're earning. And you can never get ahead when you're just spending how much you're earning. So this lesson is about trying to decouple your earning from your spending.
Yeah. And I think another thing that I remember really about that lesson is the way you do this is by sorting your money into categories. So you've got your needs, like the fixed costs that really are important to like your housing, your groceries, your wants that are a little bit like more luxurious, maybe like a travel budget, maybe like a home improvement project that you're planning to save for, maybe a car that you need to save for because your other one is going to die in the short term. And then you've got bullshit, which is the stuff that you don't actually need or want, but is just stuff that you spend anyway. And the key part of the lesson is to just eliminate spending on bullshit, which, during the pandemic, as Andrea said, is very easy. And sometimes, I think both she and I have noted that we get back into the bullshit sometimes. I think that's just, we're human, but we know that it's bullshit. And so we can kind of check ourselves when that happens.
And I think it's key in the lesson. It talks about like your needs, which are typically housing, transportation, utilities, and for you, childcare. Those are the set minimum that you have to have every single month. That's your bare minimum, literally your needs, right? And then you have a wants budget that you're allowed to spend whatever you want in the wants budget, right? And I like that idea because it simplifies. You don't have to put things into categories, right? Like $25 lattes is the same thing as buying a $100 piece of clothing. And you don't have to distinguish the two. Like, you just get to spend what you like in your wants budget, and hopefully according to what you find important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that, we often have, I think, a balance for us, and a, sort of conversation or something that comes up in our budgeting is like, how do we balance having kind of a good lifestyle kind of in the day-to-day, like being able to buy, say, just an example, maybe organic produce or things that we sort of want, sort of these add-ons that we want in the day-to-day, while also being able to plan for bigger things like going on trips or going on, going to Europe this summer or something, something that's like bigger, and how, kind of like you said, that $100, you can spend it on, on a bunch of lattes, or you can spend it on, on something else. And it's really that decision that you're making. And, I don't think we don't stress about those kind of daily decisions, but it is sort of how we live our lives of like, okay, well, maybe we're just going to make coffee at home instead, so that we can prioritize going on a larger trip or having a larger expense instead of maybe just up-leveling our day-to-day lifestyle to make it more expensive.
One of the things we're talking about is temporal discounting. Like, there's no such thing. One of the things I say is there's no such thing as not spending. It's only the question of spending now or in the future.
Right.
So, like, whether you're spending for a bigger trip later, or you're spending, quote, spending by putting it into your investment account for the future, you're just deciding to consume later.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing with wants is like you said, you're always going to spend money in that category, but it doesn't just mean being impulsive. Like, it's not like, oh, well, I want it, so therefore, like, of course, I always want a tasty treat from the bakery around the corner, but that doesn't mean that I'm always going to go get that thing, because I know that actually in my wants category, what I really actually want is, is to travel and is to do other things. And so it helps to kind of balance out that like impulsivity of something that I may want in the short term with the thing that I want in the long term, or in the midterm, I guess.
And I think one thing we talked about when we were prepping for this a little bit was that the act of budgeting and kind of getting aligned on what your spending priorities are and how you want to live your life helps you make those decisions and like say no to the bakery treat occasionally, so you can like take that trip.
Well, I'm super curious. Like, the very first lesson in financial freedom is about money scripts. Do you, like, as you started combining your finances, were there some difficult conversations about what was important to you versus what was important to the other person?
I think we both have fairly similar money scripts. like we both have the gosh, I forget what it is, like the judicious one.
Money vigilance.
Money vigilance, yes. But we did have to have some hard conversations, and we had some, like, interesting fights. I remember one time early in the pandemic, we went to the grocery store for the first time together, and Andrea wanted to buy some refried beans. And I got really mad, and I don't know why, because it's not like refried beans are expensive.
I remember that. That's so funny.
but yeah, it was just like, I think about the fact that we were having to combine our finances, and like I was losing control of how I spend my money, I think. Like I didn't want the refried beans, and I didn't want to pay for the refried beans, and so I like freaked out about it. But yeah, I think I feel like, though, we both have pretty similar life priorities and ways we want to spend money. I think I'm maybe a little more frugal, and the way that we kind of deal with that is we have an allowance that we give each other. Like we just have, a bunch of our money goes into a joint account, and then we have a couple $100s each month that was like our own slush fund, and we can do with it what we want. Like if I don't spend it, I can save it, and if I spend it, like that's my decision. And same for Andrea.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I don't think either of us. I mean, probably if you were to put us, like on a binary, maybe Brett is more the frugal and I'm more the spender, but I don't actually think that is true. I think we're both we're kind of
pretty close.
Like we're not actually either extreme. But yeah, I think it was really about, I think once we've aligned on the longer term vision, then it's made the process of going through budgeting easier. And I'll say, like, I think that partially I've come to realize in, in my relationship with Brett and, just in life, I guess it's like, it's not a fixed thing. It's always going to be changing. I mean, in the last, I guess, since we met in 2019, we've gone from being single income, no kids to, double income, no kids to, now having a child. And, recently we became single income family. And so with a kid. And so obviously that all just is a constant process of negotiation, and it's never really over. Like there's no fixed point where then you're like, okay, well, we did that and now this is going to be like this forever. It's actually going to constantly be changing as our needs change, as our daughter's needs change. And I think it is really just about having, I mean, not to get too like soapboxy, but it's like, I think that we ultimately just trust each other a lot and like understand that at the end of the day, neither of us is trying to overspend or, whether or not I want to buy the refried beans or not, that's kind of the most egregious, maybe like extent to which we're, overspending, quote, heavy air quotes, where it's not like, it's not like I'm trying to go out and buy like an Hermes purse or something, that's really like conflicting, or that we really, one of us has a super luxury taste in something that the other person doesn't really care about. So yeah, I think it's both that, like, it's a constant evolving process, and then it also just evolves. It requires a lot of trust and like just understanding that, like, yeah, we're both trying to kind of row in the same direction. And
well, Brett, as your faux money counselor, I got to say that if your biggest financial problem is your wife wants free fried beans, you're doing okay.
Yeah. I mean, let her eat the refried beans.
That's so random and funny. I don't even remember that at all. But I do remember we had a lot of weird purchases in the pandemic. I think we both had things that we kind of like panic bought, Yeah.
Oh, I also went to Fred Meyer and bought a bunch of like freeze-dried food that is terrible. And like we would never eat, even on a backpacking trip, because I was like worried the world was ending.
I do remember, I think I panic bought like way too much toothpaste. Like I really wanted to like buy all the toothpaste because I felt like toothpaste was going to run out. And that's just a completely irrational thing. But again, if the worst thing you're panic buying is toothpaste, I think it's like, okay.
Well, you brought up a couple of things that I want to parse out. Number one, the first thing is, how have you managed your budget while you've had such wild swings in income? Like, having single income, then moving to double income, then someone getting laid off. Like, I'm just curious about that process.
Obviously, we're very fortunate. We're in a very fortunate position to both be, as you mentioned before, like pretty high income earners generally. And like our fields of work are pretty, just afford us, good salaries and benefits and things like that. So we've been able to, benefit from that. And I think additionally, I think really what has suffered, or really where we've needed to cut, is like our savings and investment rate. That is really what has taken the biggest cut, with all of the changes. And I think that is generally okay. I think we are considering this moment in our lives kind of a season, or I am considering it, I guess, a season of our lives that where we are, we have a young child, we have a single income, and, childcare costs and other costs are just really high right now. And I think it's really difficult for young parents to have a high savings rate. And I think that that's okay. It's like just the reality that we're living in. And if in the future, I believe that in the future, we will get back to having that higher savings rate. So I think it's just about understanding that maybe things aren't going to look perfect right now, and they're not going to look like maybe the perfect, the perfect pie chart of all of our money going to the perfect right place, right quote unquote places. But we are getting all of our needs met, and that's really what matters.
And I think too, like the way I've looked at it is we are sort of like borrowing from the future, but this is like we are making a choice to live the life we want to live now. I think when both of us were working, we were both really tired and stressed out and kind of burning the candle at both ends and trying, paying a nanny, which was very expensive in and of itself. And now I think with I'm the one working right now, it still can be very stressful. It still can be hard. I feel like there's a lot on my shoulders, but Andrea is much more energetic and much happier, like just looking after our daughter and at the moment. And I think we all feel that better energy and that kind of better mood in our lives. So it's like, instead of retiring when we're 55 or 50, like we're able to take some time now where we're enjoying our lives and giving our daughter the life that we want to give her. So it's a bit of a trade-off, and it's hard not to see the savings accounts go up and up and up, but there is compound interest on what we've done before. So it's not like there's nothing there, and we are still contributing. It's about the 401k amount is essentially what we're saving, and then whatever else we kind of get as bonus income throughout the year.
Yeah, I'm going to say this as a joke, but it's actually very real in another sense. Like, Andrea is sort of living like she's financially free. She's getting all
Totally. I actually said that the other day. We were having a conversation about that, and Brett was like, "What are you talking about? I'm working."
But more seriously, like you talked about compound interest, right? Like there is compounding interest in a number of different ways, and the time that you spend with your daughter right now is compounding interest too, right? Like you're never going to get this time back, and this is the most valuable time to be with your kid. So, yeah, I think it's a perffically great choice to be able to spend time with your kid.
And I think to the point, I was sort of making that joke about being financially free also, but it is the fact that we did make a lot of choices throughout our careers to have very high savings rates and to sort of put a lot away and, make responsible financial choices, that now we are in a place where I mean, that is financial freedom for us as a family, that we can say, one of us cannot work and when we're still going to be okay. I mean, that is a version of financial freedom. It's not the like fire,
Right.
version, but it's an iteration of it. It's
Yeah.
it's a branch that we're kind of able to make these choices. And, I think, to be fair, like, we have talked about which one of us could not work, and like, Brett could have made that choice. We could have done this the opposite way, but I think Brett prefers to be the one who's working. So it's kind of like, anyway, we could have a different configuration down the road, and that would be okay too.
Well, one interesting configuration, I don't know if you've thought about this, but I know other couples who've taken the course do it. Like, if you figure it out that you can, as a family unit, you can live on one income. Mm-hmm. If the other person goes back to work, all of that income becomes savings rate, right? Uh-huh. Like, you don't expand your spending just because everyone starts working. Now, that all becomes this, investing for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's sort of what we are trying to do. I mean, even when Andrea went back to work after having our baby, we thought about like just living off of one income and saving, putting it all into savings. We never quite got there because then her job went away, and so we were forced to do it. But I think like when she goes back, assuming I'm still working full time, like that's what we'll aim to do.
Yeah. I think it's actually been a really valuable exercise for our family to live off of one income, to sort of have to make those choices and to reconfigure some things so that it's all kind of, flowing, instead of flowing from two accounts into kind of one account and all of that. There's been a couple logistical things we've had to do, but I think that, overall it's going to be a benefit to us when I do go back to work, which I do plan to do. So.
All right. Well, let's talk about the other reason I wanted you to do this lesson, which is, Brett told me about the most innovative way to make budgeting fun. Can you tell us about that?
When we first started wanting to combine our finances, so we first started with just a joint credit card, and that was right when Brett moved in to my place, and we needed a way to decide or agree, I guess, on what categories would go onto the card and how much we were going to spend on them, so that there weren't any surprises and we were just kind of all on the same page. And obviously those initial conversations about kind of revealing what categories you want to spend on and how much you want to spend on those categories can be kind of a scary and intimidating conversation.
A little vulnerable. It's like
a little bit like, oh, I don't know, like show me yours and I'll show you mine kind of thing. So as we started to have those conversations, we came up with a concept of strip budgeting. So I can't believe that this is a concept that we made up. I think we had to have seen it somewhere on the internet, but we, anyways, for us, we invented the way that we.
I mean, it was the pandemic. We were, there was some weird shit going on in the world. We may have just come up with this ourselves.
We may have just come up with it ourselves, but yeah, I don't want to like claim it if somebody else. I'm sure somebody else somewhere is doing it, did it better than we did. But yeah, essentially we went through each category. We kind of agreed on what the categories were, and then kind of revealed to each other how much we were spending in that category and how much we would want to spend. And then the person with the higher number had to take off an article of clothing and, sort of just as kind of to make it more fun and lighthearted. So, sorry, Mom, if you're listening. But yeah, that was kind of how we did it to make it a little more fun. And, honestly, we never made it too far in the game. But,
I would like to say that Andrea probably lost or won with the baked beans or the refried beans, but I don't know if that's true.
It was the beans. Yeah, totally. But yeah, I probably lost. I'll admit that.
Wait, when you say you lost, Does that mean you wanted to spend more? Or
who loses at strip poker?
Exactly.
there are no losers. We're all just winners here. But no, I probably just had higher categories of spending.
But like barely. And I spent more on a car like that, and the TV.
Yeah. Yeah, there were definitely things. I mean, I think through that, I think that couples have to do that. There has to be a point where you sit down and say, okay, how much do you think we should spend on, say, groceries? And, you each kind of say your number, and that can be scary because, if they're super far off, that can be a difficult conversation to have. So, yeah, I do think it was a good way to sort of make it fun and funny and,
and like look forward to it too.
Yeah. Open up a nice bottle of wine.
If we were just like looking at the spreadsheets and comparing, like we would never have wanted to do it, but we're taking off clothes. There's some fun involved.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna start blushing here in a second. But yeah, no, anything. I don't know. I guess it's funny that I love that. It's just sort of your first time hearing of it because I feel like you've heard all sorts of stories about how couples do this kind of thing. But I guess how do other people do it, and what how should you do it, and what does that look like? What does budgeting as a couple look like for other people?
Well, I suspect that after people hearing this episode, there's going to be no other way to do budgeting.
Fair.
Well, so, one of the products of strip budgeting perhaps was your daughter.
Oh my God.
Like years later. Wow.
So I'm curious with Izzy now. How old is Izzy now?
She's 14 months. So
okay, 14 months.
Mm-hmm.
Major shift in the family. Talk about how having a child has affected finances.
Oof. You want to take that one, Brett?
Yeah. I guess I do want to say one other thing about our changes of income. One thing that I think we did that was really smart and made us feel comfortable was we talked to a financial advisor right before she was born, and they looked at our finances and kind of said, this is the impact it will have on your ability to retire. This is the, things that you could do differently. They said, start saving for her college now. Like all of those, that I think was a really good thing to try to do right before having a kid. And I think made us feel a lot more comfortable with like the arrangement that we have now, or at least made me feel more comfortable. But back to your original question of like having a child, it totally changes everything. But, even just the act of having the child in a hospital is like, if we didn't have health insurance, it would be like $20,000 or something like that. So that's insane. And even with health insurance, we maxed out our out-of-pocket max for the year. So there's the cost of having the child medically, and then all the stuff, which we listened to the Story of Stuff episode over the weekend, and like that, like I think Kurt was his name. We got a lot of stuff from friends and family. Like we maybe bought 3 articles of clothing and 2 toys, and everything else has come from friends and family. But there's so many diapers. So when Andrea was working, we were paying for a nanny, and that was very expensive because childcare is not cheap, and especially if you want like good childcare. And so that our spending has definitely gone up in many categories, but other things have decreased. Like we travel a bit less, or the trips that we take are more local, or with going to friends or family, so we're staying with them and not like paying for a hotel. We try to eat at home a lot more, partly because like going out to a restaurant with a toddler is not as rewarding. And
What do you mean?
or
This is when
places aren't open at 7, for like, yeah.
This is also when the refried beans become more important.
Yes. She loves hummus.
Yeah.
And she likes refried beans too, actually. But yeah. But so I feel like those are the ways that I've seen our spending change. I don't know. Do you have others, Andrea? Like,
I mean, yeah, how hasn't it changed? I guess it's like, and it's interesting because, and you do touch on this in the lesson, which I think is good. That, I mean, I think having a child is a poor financial decision. And like, and I say that, having wanted to be a mom and having made this choice, with all of my facilities, like I wanted this and I chose it for myself, but I it's not great for your finances. It doesn't do good things for your finances. But I think that's okay too, because it's rewarding in other ways. And I think, I think we find more enjoyment out of just kind of hanging out at home, or, all the ways that Brett described, like going to visit family and staying with cousins and, having more of those types of trips and having more meals at home. And all those things are actually, I feel like they've been made more enjoyable by becoming a parent and having Izzy to kind of show the world to. And when you have the ability to show the world to somebody new, it's kind of, you get to create what that world looks like and how you operate and what sorts of things you do. And I think that's, I mean, it's incredible. It's this whole different thing. So I think, I don't know, sort of a long-winded answer. I don't think I'm really answering your question, but it's like everything changed, and it's, from a purely financial perspective, not the best, not going to get you any closer to, firing yourself or whatever, your sort of ultimate goal is with finances, but it opens up so much world. And I have found it to be rewarding despite the sort of change, the financial changes that, occur. But, being a parent is not for everyone. And I'm not saying it's all only pie in the sky all the time. I'm just saying, like, on that binary, it's like.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, right, your finances are only there to support the life you want. And if you really wanted to have children and you wanted to start a family, the whole point of the money was to be able to do this, not vice versa.
Right.
So yeah, I would say, like, earlier in the course, you talk about what is the life you want to create, and you've created the life you want to create.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way of, that's a good way of thinking about it. But yeah, it is. I co-sign kind of what Brett was saying about speaking to the financial advisor too, because I think it was very apparent there, kind of playing out different scenarios of, what happens when you do need to send a kid to college or, sort of support a kid financially in your 60s, 70s, right around the time when you're looking to retire or to, stop working a full-time job. And actually speaking to somebody who could run those numbers for us and plug different things in and talk us through different scenarios was comforting, knowing that there is a path to retirement for people who have children. It's just maybe going to take a little longer than, what you might have originally thought or the trajectory you might have originally been on.
Or when they want to move back home in their 20s, back into your basement.
Yes.
Not that I ever did that myself, but
I did.
No, I did too. So it's interesting because, we talked about money scripts, and one of the things I think about is, what are you going to teach Izzy, and what are all the unspoken scripts Izzy's going to learn about money and, like, entitlement, like too high incomes. Like, what do you want to teach Izzy about money?
That question hits me right in the feels. Because I think that is one thing that maybe Brett and I like grew up a little bit differently about. And for me, I grew up with all my needs being met, but not necessarily in like we weren't wealthy, or, I sort of had to pay for my own college and things like that, that kind of, I didn't have a lot of those, I guess, entitlements or things that were extras, and things, I don't know how to, I guess, because I had all my needs met, like I said, so I don't want to talk about it like I didn't have my needs met. But now what we're doing is, we started a 529 right when Izzy was born, and we've been putting money into it. And by the time Izzy is, can make the choice of what she wants to do for college, she's going to have money for that. And it's interesting to think about. I'm super proud on one hand of being able to give her that and to empower her in that way with her education or with whatever she wants to do, after she, whatever she wants to do with her life. But I also do think about myself, and I think I worked so hard and I, kind of fought tooth and nail and and is there something about that kind of grittiness and that motivation and that desire to really kind of get ahead that maybe she won't have, or she won't have to experience? And I think there's pros and cons to that.
Yeah. I think so about a year or so ago, I was talking to a coworker who lives in a wealthy suburb, and she was describing her daughter and said that her daughter was a mean girl and wanted a Porsche when she turned 16. And I think like that is one thing that I think about when I think about like the values that I want to give to Izzy and the way that I want her to kind of be with money and around money and the values that I want to try and instill with her. At the same time, I think, one thing for me that would be really hard is putting her in public school where we live. It's not very well rated. We live in an elementary school district like has a 1 on all the like websites and stuff. And I think that for me, our family was 1 out of 10. Our family was more comfortable and more affluent than Andrea's, but I went to a school that wasn't great, and I felt like I never really fit in until I was older and in high school and or really in college. So I don't know. I feel like there's kind of that counterbalance of not wanting to spoil your child rotten, but also wanting to like have them be comfortable and have them fit in and have them be happy. So
yeah. And it's interesting because I don't necessarily feel that, I don't feel as much that way about our public schools, because I also went to like my neighborhood school, and I think there is value in sending your kid to the local school, and going to school with your neighbors and the people that you're around. And, but yeah, it's a tough kind of choice that we're going to have to make. We still have a few years to make it, and who knows if we'll even still be living in this house. And, there's so many other things that could happen until then. But it is, it's like with money and with the ability to make these choices, with a myriad of different choices in front of you, always making the choice that sort of isolates your child more in a environment where they're around people who are only like them, or who only as kind of affluent as them, or only have the same opportunities as them. I think that would be really hard for me, to kind of do and to kind of continue to do as she gets older. And, I would still want her to have experiences with other peers, with people that she lives around and other types of people, and not just kind of isolate her to only certain experiences like like a private school might afford.
Well, it sounds like there are going to be a lot of clothes taken off on this decision.
Potentially. But again, I mean, I think so much, it's kind of like the conversation of whether or not we're going to maybe like give her a cell phone or not, in the future.
But much
like,
bigger.
Who even knows what the technology is going to look like when she's old enough to want that or know what that even looks like, or we even, who knows? So I think there's just a lot of speculation that we can make now, but, we'll see.
It isn't, you're bringing something really interesting up, Andrea, which is, whatever values you want to impart on Izzy's going to grow up in capitalism. Like, she's going to be influenced by something much greater than you. Have you thought about like this idea that your kid's going to grow up with the values of both consumerism and workism and achievement culture?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we both grew up with those values too. I think maybe not so much consumerism, but definitely achievement culture and workism. I think like that's been very much like that's how we both ended up in like high paying jobs. Is that sort of like workism and achievementism. And I think it's one of the arguments that Andrea makes about sending your kid to a neighborhood school is that it doesn't really matter the school. It's more like what the environment at home. And I think like with workism and with achievementism and with consumerism, like we can do our best to give her the values and have her understand the values that we want her to have. But again, she may not. It's like my argument with the neighborhood school is like, that doesn't matter though if like she's getting bullied or the teachers are terrible or her classmates are disruptive, right? That's like the consumerism and the achievement culture that may not be necessarily the values that we want to see. So yeah, I feel like it's sort of the same kind of conversation. It's like how much is our influence versus how much is the external influence. And it's like hopefully she is a good critical thinker, like her mom, and is able to just kind of like see through the bullshit or question the bullshit of life a little bit. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, there are, so many studies, and I'm not going to sort of be able to name them off the top of my head now, but about, so much of what your kids' education and their foundation is about what happens within their home. And I mean, we have so many beautiful books for Izzy. We read to her every day. We talk to her about, complex things, and I'm sure we're going to continue to do that, throughout her life. And that really is going to be more her educational foundation, is going to have much more influence on her critical thinking skills and just sort of, over time than I think her school environment will. And I don't know. I mean, I guess that's just my opinion, but obviously we don't want her to get bullied or things like that. But I think that's also kind of our own, I think it's sort of the media and other things kind of blowing the predicament of public schools a little bit out of proportion. Those ratings on schools, I don't really believe them. They're very much about, anyways, I could get all into that, but I'm the daughter of two public school teachers, so I have a lot to say on that topic. But yeah, I mean, I think the point stands that it's like we are the ones who are going to influence her education and her values around money and her values around what matters. I mean, we are at least going to provide her the foundation of those things, and I think that we'll be able to do that independent of what school she goes to. Is my possibly naive belief.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm sure you two will work it out well together in the coming years before she gets to school, and you can always change your mind as she enters the school too.
Yeah.
But we're coming up to the end of our interview. I have a couple more questions. First of all, anything else you want to tell the audience about budgeting and your experience with it?
I mean, I think it's important. I think maybe I spoke a little bit about transparency before, and just I think trust and transparency are just so important. And I know that that's maybe not applicable to people who are budgeting by themselves, although maybe it is. Being trusting yourself and being transparent with yourself is also very important, and not kind of hiding or running from your numbers, which I feel like I did for a long time in my life. And now what we have is, we were using Mint and now we're using Rocket Money since Mint, RIP Mint.
Yeah.
But Rocket Money has been fine. It's just whatever tool you use. It's just about putting your numbers in, and we both have access to that, and that's where all of our things go. And I maybe am more in the weeds on it than Brett is, but I know that he has access to it and that he trusts me to, make sure that we're doing well and to bring things up when maybe things are going a little off the rails. And that's what works for us. But it's always from a basis of kind of radical transparency and honesty. And there's no kind of no secret accounts we have that aren't shared or that aren't, just kind of out there. And I think that is so important and foundational to good budgeting. And yeah, again, I think you can do it with a partner, but you can also do that with yourself. I think there's probably a lot of years of my life where I was like, well, whatever goes on that credit card, I'm not going to think about that. I'll think about that later. But no, bringing everything together, having it all be really well organized and that you can see in a place that's easily accessible is so important.
Beautiful. How about you, Brett?
I think that it is something that is continual, right? Like for our life, we've gone through a bunch of different changes, and so we've had to revisit our budget. But even if you don't have, if your life is kind of more consistent and static, like you need to go in there and just kind of true up and make sure that what you're spending fits your budget. Otherwise, the budget's a little worthless. If you say I'm going to spend $300 on eating out and you spend $500 and that's just as what you spend all the time, like your budget is not doing you any good. Like it should be realistic and it should be based on kind of what you're actually spending and not like something that's, what's the word, like idealistic or aspirational,
Yeah, it's what I'm hearing is it's a way of seeing the truth about yourself.
Yeah, totally.
It's curious, Brett. Like one of the things I think about is as I'm listening to you is it's been 5 years since you met, and so many changes. And I knew you before, right? And I knew all the worries you had before, and like now, Andrea being in your life, how much better your life is with her. And I think it's beautiful just thinking about all the changes you've gone through in the last 5 years. And we could have never predicted it when we were hanging out in Vietnam.
Totally.
Talking about our issues with women.
Eating like four banh mi's a day.
Well, I mean, it occurs to me what you're saying, Andrea, is like, personal finance is this part of this like larger project, like spiritually of moving from me to we. And the two of you have done moving from me to we really beautifully. So really want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah. It's I'm super.
Yeah. And I think, it's like, I think that, I mean, I have to say, obviously credit you, but, also credit Brett with kind of having started with the foundation of financial freedom. Cause I think we kind of made the joke before that when I met, I was like, ooh, this guy is like so into his, so financially secure, which, was not one of the, primary initial reasons I was attracted to Brett. But, definitely, like, obviously, once you start to have conversations with someone and get more into dating somebody and knowing them better, the fact that he was so, like, on it with kind of, not being weird about money and not having kind of hangups about it. It's just like, I feel like it's just akin to kind of therapy. Like if you're talking to somebody who's gone to a lot of therapy and they're really able to kind of access conversations about their emotions and things. And when somebody can do that with money too, and it sort of creates this level of connection that I think is really nice. And there's so many conversations about dating that's like, oh, who pays, or is it weird, or how do you kind of combine things, and people make it kind of overly wrought, I think. But when you've taken a course like Financial Freedom and know how to talk about your money, I think it really does make a difference. Like it really does show up in the conversations that you have.
Okay, 2 last questions. You may have partially answered it already, but first is, what would be your pitch to financial freedom for someone who hasn't taken it yet?
I think just really piggybacking on what Andrea says, at least for someone in a couple and in a relationship, it gives you a framework and a sort of lens that you can have conversations with money about. But I think even if you're not in a relationship, and if you're single or whatever, like for me, it gave me a sort of strategy for how I spend my money and made me think about putting my money to work for myself rather than just being more of a passive consumer, really like being in charge of my money and how I want to live my life and making sure that my money was working for me in that way.
As opposed to your money working for other people.
Yes.
Andrea, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe just that I was able to, I think I had a lot of, it's good to, I guess it's just the same thing Brett's saying, actually. Integrate your money into your life and not consider it this kind of external thing. Look at your money, see where it's going. I think for so long, I know myself, I was sort of hiding it under a rug, I think, and not really wanting to look at it and not really wanting to analyze it. But it's so much better once you can look at it and analyze it and look at it without shame and actually make it work for you. So I think I recommend it to a lot of people that I know who are in all kinds of stages of their life. And I'm like, you can always start looking at your money and making it work for you. There's no, yeah.
You can't change something that you're not willing to look at.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, last question, a fun question. And both of you can take it. A good metaphor between either marriage or child raising to personal finance.
Ooh.
Or vice versa, a good metaphor from personal finance to either marriage or child raising.
I guess maybe like you're never done with either, you know? You're
all
never
three,
done
you
with
mean?
all three, yeah, really. Like, you know, they all kind of require constant work and like maintenance. I mean, the other one I was thinking is maybe like, you know, the goal with personal finance is to make your money work for you, and the goal with having kids is to make your kids do your work for you too. Yeah.
Well, along your metaphor, Brett, I think one of the things is like, yeah, personal finance, child raising, or marriage, you're working on it, but hopefully you can make it fun and joyful.
Yeah.
Or it becomes a drag.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I mean, I was sort of like trying to think if there's anything about like, you know, poop or something. I don't know.
What goes in must come out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I was trying to come up with something around that, but no, the mom brain is kicking in, so can't come up with anything right now. But I think maybe that's I like Brett's. I'll co-sign Brett's.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Brett and Andrea, thank you so much for showing up for this episode. It's like late at night. You have just put your kid down and it's super late. Just grateful that you made the time.
Yeah. I'm so glad that that you thought of us, and we're so grateful to be your friend and also part of the financial freedom community. So thanks for having us.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. I think it's late, so I'll leave you to some budgeting tonight. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is School of Financial Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Douglas Soy. We'll come back for another episode soon. Thank you for tuning in to the School of Financial Freedom podcast, where we ask, what does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit into that? We hope you enjoyed this episode and it helps you live with an increasing sense of empowerment, integrity, and agency in the world. For more information, resources, and to re-listen to this or any past episodes, visit our website at schoolofinancialfreedom.com. There you can find out when the next cohort of Financial Freedom 1, the online course is. If you've enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a review, as it helps more people find us and join our community of people interested in the intersection of money and personal and spiritual growth. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of the School of Financial Freedom. You can also find me on Substack, where you can subscribe to my popular newsletter, Money and Meaning. I also love hearing from readers and listeners, so write me at www.douglassoy.com. I'm grateful that you listened, and I hope that this episode has given you hope and insight into taking control of your finances to live the life you want.